A humble mechanic stumbled upon a billionaire heiress chained inside an abandoned barn. What happened next was truly unexpected. The wind brought with it the scent of rust and aged hay, drifting over the town's edge, where the old barn leaned against a hillside like a forgotten artifact from another era. Luke Callahan, with his sleeves rolled up in grease marking his arms, moved cautiously through the tall weeds beyond a broken fence. He had heard whispers about an old Chevy truck left behind these barns, and he was searching for a timing belt bracketing item nearly impossible to find new and far too costly for him. His flashlight scanned the rotting planks of the largest barn, catching glimpses of metal and fleeting shadows stirred by the wind. He entered, his boots pressing into the cracked wooden floor. The smell struck him immediately. Stale air, decaying timber, and a metallic tang beneath it all. He stopped, listening closely. A sound reached him. It was faint, barely more than a breath, but it was not the wind. A muffled call for help, distant and unclear. Luke moved toward the far stall, half collapsed from years of neglect. His heartbeat quickened as he drew closer. "Please help me. Please." It was a woman's voice, rough and trembling. Luke knelt, pulled aside a broken door, and directed his flashlight into the shadows. The sight made his stomach churn. A young woman, chained at the wrists and ankles with heavy links, slumped but shivering. A cloth was tied over her mouth, and bruises marked her limbs. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted and stuck to her dirt-streaked face. Her eyes met his, wide with fear. Without delay, Luke set down his flashlight and reached to remove her gag. She recoiled, shaking her head, but he gently touched her wrist. "I am not going to hurt you," he assured her, his tone calm and steady. "I promise. I am here to help." She studied him for a moment, then stopped resisting. He loosened the gag and she coughed, drawing in air. "Do not call anyone, please. Not yet. I just need to get out of here." "As far away as possible," she whispered. Luke was taken aback by the urgency in her words. She was not desperate to be found by the world. She was terrified of it. He nodded. "Okay. No one else. Just me." He took a wrench from his belt and worked on the lock, securing her chains. After a tense struggle, the lock snapped and the chains fell away. She collapsed into his arms, barely conscious. "I have you," he murmured. He carried her out of the barn, careful not to aggravate her injuries, and placed her gently in his truck's passenger seat. She flinched at every sudden movement, her eyes scanning the darkness as if expecting someone to emerge. "Where do you live?" he asked, fastening her seatbelt. She shook her head weakly. Nowhere safe, he realized. She could not return to her old life. He took her to his homemade converted garage on a deserted service road, where he lived alone, and only those in need of cheap repairs ever visited. He did not ask her name yet. She needed rest, warmth, and water. Inside, he helped her to the couch, wrapped her in a blanket, and brought his first aid kit. She winced as he cleaned her wounds, but remained silent. Her quietness was not from fear, but calculation, as if she was trying to decide whether he was just another threat. "My name is Luke," he said softly, applying ointment to a cut on her cheek. "That is all you need to know about me for now. You are safe here." Her lips moved slowly. "Madeline." "All right, Madeline. Are you hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. He warmed a can of soup and placed it beside her, stepping back to give her space. She stared at the bowl for a while before picking up the spoon with trembling hands. Luke leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching as her breathing steadied. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was necessary. She had endured something unimaginable. Whatever had happened in that barn, she was not ready to share, and he would not force her. He spent the night in his workshop, listening for any sound. The world outside continued on, and somewhere, someone likely believed Madeline was gone forever. But she was here, and only he knew. As dawn approached and the sky shifted from black to gray, Luke looked up at the old rusted sign above his workbench. "Keep your hands dirty. Keep your heart clean." He had never thought those words meant much until now. Madeline was still asleep when Luke checked on her, curled tightly under the blanket, gripping the edge as if it were her only anchor. He watched her briefly before turning away. He realized he had crossed a boundary that most people would never understand. But when he saw the fear and desperation in her eyes back in that barn, he made a decision. He chose to trust her. No police, no reporters, no money involved. Just faith. And if trouble came looking, it would have to get through him first. Morning arrived in a haze of sunlight and dust. Rays filtered to the bent blinds in the garage, casting golden stripes across a floor scattered with bolts, parts, and oil stains that had become part of the place. The smell of motor oil lingered, now mixed with the aroma of chicken broth simmering on a portable stove. Madeline hadn't stirred much since collapsing on the couch, but now her eyes were open, cautiously taking in her surroundings as Luke entered with a chip bowl. She sat up quickly, her body reacting before her mind. "You're safe?" he reassured her gently. "I didn't touch your things. I didn't call anyone." She eyed the bowl suspiciously. "What is it?" "Soup. I don't have much else." He placed it on the table beside her. "Eat whenever you want." He didn't hover, instead returning to his workbench, pretending to tinker with an old alternator, but he was listening. After a while, she reached for the spoon, her hand still shaking. "Luke," she said, her voice softer. "That's your name, right?" He nodded, not looking up. "Yeah, I'm Madeline," she repeated, as if it mattered more this time. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "Nice to meet you again, Madeline." She took another bite, then set the bowl down with a heavy thud. "I think I should tell you something." Luke just nodded, waiting. "I was taken 2 nights ago," she began, staring at the floor. "Middle of the afternoon, right outside a coffee shop near my place. They weren't amateurs. They knew my habits. They were waiting." Her voice grew firmer as she recounted the memory. One asked for directions. Another grabbed me from behind. I fought back, bit one of them hard enough to draw blood. But they hit me. Next thing I knew, I was in the back of a van. No blindfold, no masks. They didn't care if I saw their faces. Luke's grip tightened on his wrench. They brought me to that barn after dark, tied me up. One kept laughing, saying I'd be rescued soon. He said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Our boss is going to play the hero. He'll come save you, and you'll fall right into his arms." Luke's eyes narrowed. "You think someone hired them?" She nodded. "I don't know who, but they weren't after ransom. They didn't even ask for money. It felt staged, like they wanted to scare me, not profit." Luke moved closer, sitting a few feet away. "Do you know who might be behind it?" She searched his face. "I have a suspicion, but if I say the name, everything changes." "I don't need to know yet," he said calmly. She looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because right now you need to eat, breathe, and feel safe. The rest can wait." Madeline exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing a bit. "You're not going to ask if I'm making it up?" "Nope." "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you didn't look crazy when I found you. You looked scared. And people don't chain themselves to barn posts." She let out a short, surprised laugh. Then she grew serious again. "There's another reason I didn't want you to call anyone. If whoever did this finds out I escaped, they'll try again. And next time, I might not be so lucky." Luke leaned back, arms resting on his legs. "You want to disappear for a while?" She nodded. "I can help with that," he said. "This place isn't much, but no one comes out here unless they owe me for a carburetor." Her gaze softened. "Why are you helping me?" He tilted his head. "Would you believe I'm just a good guy?" She raised an eyebrow. "Honestly? In this world?" "No." He chuckled. "Fair." She looked around the garage, the living space, the organized clutter of his life. "You live here?" "Since my dad died. Left me the garage. No family, no fancy history. Just hard work." Madeline pulled the blanket tighter. "You're the first person in a long time who didn't want something from me." "I don't even know who you are," Luke replied. "Exactly." They sat in a silence that was full, not empty fragile, but real. Trust, unexpected and new. Outside, the sun rose over a town unaware of what had happened. Inside, a girl with a dangerous past and a famous name sat across from a man who cared only that she was safe. For now. Then the news exploded. Madeline Carrington, heiress to the Carrington biomedical fortune, was reported missing. Last seen outside a downtown cafe 2 nights ago. Police suspected foul play. Luke stood in his garage, wrench in hand, as the radio buzzed with updates. Reporters speculated. Guests discussed her family, her wealth, her influence. He glanced at the back room. Madeline was there, alive, sipping tea on the cot, knees to her chest. Her face turned pale when she heard Carrington on the radio. "You didn't say Carrington," Luke said, still processing. Madeline looked up. "Guilty. I was going to. I didn't want it to change things." He turned off the radio. "I don't care about your last name," he said. But the name Carrington meant power, enemies, and trouble. They both knew what was coming. By evening, a police cruiser appeared the driveway, dust rising behind it. 2 more followed, plus a black SUV with tinted windows. A man in a suit flashed a badge that wasn't local. They moved quickly. 3 officers circled back. 2 approached the door. Luke opened it before they could knock. "Are you Luke Callahan?" The man in the suit asked, his gaze sweeping the room. "Yes. What's happening?" "Keep your hands where we can see them." Madeline appeared in the doorway behind Luke. "Wait. Please wait." Luke didn't move aside. "Ma'am," one of the officers called out. "We have reason to believe this man is involved in the abduction of Madeline Carrington." Luke slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake." The man in the suit stepped closer, his tone icy. "We have statements from 3 suspects in custody claiming you arranged the kidnapping, that you paid them to keep her here while you negotiated a ransom." Madeline's eyes widened. "That's a lie." Luke held her gaze, calm and unwavering. "If you don't speak up," he said quietly, "they'll assume the worst." The officers closed in. Cold metal tightened around his wrists. Madeline rushed forward. "He saved me. He didn't kidnap me. He found me. He was alone with you for over 48 hours. The agent replied sharply. "That's plenty of time for him to manipulate your perception. It's called trauma bonding. A classic case." Luke stayed silent, offering no resistance as they led him away. Madeline followed, panic rising. "You're making a mistake. He's innocent." The man turned to her, his tone less harsh but still detached. "Ma'am, you've been through a traumatic ordeal. We'll take your statement after a medical evaluation. Right now, our job is to keep you safe and make sure he answers for these allegations." The door closed with a final click, shutting Luke inside the cruiser. As the car pulled away, it took with it the only person who had believed Madeline without caring about her identity. Madeline stood in the settling dust, her heart pounding and fists clenched. She was no longer in chains, but now someone else was. Her silence, meant to protect, now threatened to destroy the man who had saved her. The hospital room was filled with the scent of disinfectant and expensive flowers. Bouquets lined the windowsill, orchids, lilies, roses, each with a card offering sympathy and well wishes. None of it mattered. Madeline sat upright in bed, her heart heavy. Faint red marks still circled her wrists. Her color had returned, but inside she was unraveling. The door opened quietly, and a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit entered, his smile polished and practiced. "Madeline," he greeted warmly. "Thank God you're safe." Nathaniel Rhodes. "Of course." She didn't smile back. "Why are you here?" He laughed softly, as if embarrassed by his own boldness. "Your father called me. He said you needed familiar faces. I've been worried about you." She stiffened. "I was missing for 3 days. Where were you before now?" "I didn't want to get in the way," he replied smoothly, stepping closer. "But now that we know who's responsible, I had come." Her brow furrowed. "Do we?" Nathaniel pulled a sleek manila envelope from his jacket. "Authorities found this on the man they arrested. Luke Callahan. It's all here text, digital transfers, plans of your father's estate. He orchestrated everything." Madeline took the envelope. Inside were printouts too neat, too perfect. Supposed messages from Luke arranging the job. Fake money transfers from unfamiliar accounts. She stared at them, unblinking. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping. "He deceived you, Madeline. You were vulnerable. He's clever, manipulative. He used your trauma to gain your trust. Her mind spun. It was all too convenient. I want to believe you, she said carefully, but something doesn't add up. He tilted his head. Like what? Her voice steadied. Like the fact that my kidnapper never asked for money, never made threats, never demanded anything. And Luke didn't even know who I was until he heard it on the radio. Nathaniel's smile didn't waver. That's how manipulation works. They act innocent, earn your trust, but it's all calculated. Madeline remembered the barn, the chains, the mocking voice. The boss is going to come rescue the princess. One of them had laughed. At the time, it seemed like a cruel joke. Now, the words echoed in her mind. She stared at Nathaniel. What are you hiding? He blinked, startled. Excuse me? She stood, ignoring the pain in her legs. You always tried to get close to my family. My father trusted you. I never did. And you hated that. That's not fair. She moved to the window. I did some research while I was gone. Your company, Rhodes International, is under investigation for fraudulent medical patents and offshore laundering. There's a federal case pending against you. His smile finally faltered. You shouldn't believe everything you read. I didn't, she replied. But I trust timing and motive. He stepped closer, his expression hardening. Madeline, I'm here to protect you. I love you. She turned to face him, her tone icy. You're here to protect yourself. If I married you, all your problems would vanish. With the Carrington name attached to your case, you'd be untouchable. He didn't reply, and his silence said it all. Suddenly, everything made sense. The kidnapping, the stage rescue, Luke's arrest. It was all a carefully crafted deception. And Luke? He wasn't the villain. He was the only genuine thing in the entire charade. Madeline felt tears threaten, but she refused to let them fall, not for Nathaniel. Not anymore. You tried to use my fear as your escape route, she said, but you made one fatal mistake. He scowled. And what's that? She stepped forward, her voice fierce. You underestimated me. At dawn, Madeline left the Carrington estate, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble steps, the sound quickly swallowed by the morning mist. She wore simple clothes, no jewelry, no designer coat, just a tan trench and a leather bag. She didn't use the family car. Instead, she ordered a rideshare, gave an address in a neighborhood her father's friends would never visit, and vanished. She left behind a mansion filled with silence, hushed conversations, and lawyers who begged her to let the official process handle things. But Madeline knew those systems weren't built for people like Luke. They existed to protect men like Nathaniel. By midday, she had hired an independent investigator with no ties to her family. Together, they retraced every step from the barn to Luke's garage, along the dirt road to a gas station, where a security camera had captured grainy footage of Luke carrying her, battered and bloodied, to his truck. The timestamp matched her account exactly. They found a retired farmer 2 miles from the barn, who recalled hearing chains clinking that night. He remembered Luke's truck because it was missing a passenger side mirror. He also remembered Luke stopping by a week earlier, looking for parts. He seemed like he was trying to fix something, the farmer said. Never thought he'd end up fixing a person. Madeline's lawyer gathered every photo, statement, and recording. They compiled a report that contradicted every allegation made by Nathaniel's hired men. The so-called evidence against Luke fake bank records, forged text was traced to a cloud server registered to a shell company linked to Rhodes International. The case was solid, but even that might not be enough. Once someone is painted as guilty, her lawyer warned, the system rarely checks if it used the right brush. Madeline didn't hesitate. Then I'll use a brighter color. That night, she wrote her statement page after page of everything she remembered, what Luke had done and what had been done to him. She didn't give it to her father or the police. She gave it to the media. The next morning, she stood on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, reporters shouting her name. Her father watching behind, arms folded, face unreadable. Nathaniel was nowhere to be seen. She gripped the microphone, steady despite the wind. I was kidnapped, she began. But the most dangerous part wasn't the barn, the chains, or the fear. She paused. It was a silence, afterward the pressure to let it be buried. The suggestion that the man who saved my life, Luke Callahan, was anything but a hero. She told the whole story, leaving nothing out. How Luke found her, how he never once tried to use her name, how he gave her warm food, safety, and space to breathe, how he never asked who she was, only if she was okay. I owe him everything, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Then she looked out at the crowd, reporters, townspeople, strangers, and straight into the cameras. If the justice system cannot protect a man like Luke Callahan, who had nothing, who did everything right, who saved a life and asked for nothing in return, then I have no reason to carry the name Carrington any longer. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She pressed on, her voice clear and resolute. I renounce any association that shields predators, punishes truth, but lets power distort reality. I will not stand behind my name if that name silences the innocent. She stepped back. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but Madeline didn't answer. She didn't after the truth had already been spoken, and this time the world listened. Luke was released at dawn. No cameras, no press. Just a clerk behind a glass window, sliding over a manila envelope with his wallet, belt, and watch. He asked no questions, called no one, and didn't look back as the gates closed behind him. He walked 5 miles through town, never stopping. The world had judged him guilty before hearing his side. Now, even after the truth emerged, it offered no apology. It simply moved on. He didn't return home. Instead, he went somewhere no one knew, his name a forgotten town, a crumbling garage once owned by the man who taught him everything about engines but nothing about the world's coldness. He rebuilt the workbench, patched the roof, and started offering free repairs to single mothers, veterans, and kids with barely running cars. Word spread quietly. He fixed more than just machines. He gave people something no one had given him in a long time. Time, patience, kindness. He kept his head down, hoping the world would forget about him. But Madeline hadn't. She found him on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Her car rolled to a stop at the edge of the crack lot. She stepped out, heels crunching on gravel, a paper bag in one hand and a nervous tremor in the other. She paused for a long moment, watching him bend over the hood of a battered Buick. Sleeves rolled up, arms marked with oil. He didn't look up. "Luke," she called, her voice soft and unsure. He froze, slowly wiped his hands on a rag, and straightened. Their eyes met in silence. Somewhere, a wrench clattered on concrete, breaking the stillness. Luke looked at her, not angry, not resentful, just weary. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I had to find you. Well, now you have." He nodded. "So what now?" She stepped closer. "You vanished. I thought that's what you wanted." She shook her head. "That's not what I want." He let out a breath, setting the rag aside. "You're a Carrington. You belong on magazine covers and marble floors. I belong under a hood fixing broken radiators." She blinked away tears. "Do you really think that's what matters to me?" He stayed silent. "You told me I shouldn't have stayed silent," she whispered. "So I didn't. I stood before the whole world and told them the truth. About you, about what you did, about what you didn't do." He watched her, as if afraid to hope. "I saw the press," he murmured. She stepped closer. "But that's not why I came." "Then why?" She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Because you need to know something." He waited. "I used to think you saved me from a barn, but you rescued me from something worse, my world. The lies, the silence, the comfort of doing nothing. You reminded me what it means to stand up even when it hurts." Luke looked away, hands curling into fists. "Madeline Dash." She pulled a small, worn silver ring from her pocket, catching the light. "This was my mother's," she said quietly. "Before the mansions, before the last name meant anything. She wore it when she was broke, in love, and free." She took his hand. "I don't need a man with a title. I don't need a savior. I just need someone who saw me when I was nobody at all." She pressed the ring into his palm, tears brimming but her voice strong. "I don't need a hero, Luke. I need you." He stood motionless, staring at the ring and then at her, and for the first time in years, he let the weight go let himself breathe, let himself believe. He drew her close, gently, as if she were something precious he was finally allowed to hold, and she held him back with a certainty that money could never buy. Beneath a patched tin roof, surrounded by rust, dust, and broken things being made whole, two people finally stopped running from their past, their fears, and each other. 6 months later, a new sign hung above the garage. It was hand-carved, a little crooked, weathered by sun and time, but the words burned into wood red. Hope Garage. Free to learn, free to grow. Luke stood in the doorway, arms folded, grease on his sleeves as always, watching 3 teenagers debate the best way to align a brake caliper. Madeline leaned against the counter behind him, sorting donated tools, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, face glowing with sunlight and the satisfaction of real work. They'd started with nothing but Luke's old tools and a grant Madeline had quietly secured, not with her last name, but by pitching the project anonymously as Hands for Forgotten. They taught skills, changed tires, fixed alternators, but more importantly, they gave kids a reason to show up. Kids like Elijah, kicked out of school for fighting, Mia, who'd lived in a shelter for over a year, Tyler, who rarely spoke but always arrived on time. Each had their own ghosts, and somehow Luke and Madeline had become the place where those ghosts grew quiet. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Rhodes was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. His empire collapsed under the weight of the truth, and when the verdict was read, Madeline didn't even look up. She was busy teaching a girl how to change oil. One afternoon, after a long, hot day, Luke sat on the porch steps, sipping iced tea, boots dusty and unlaced. The kids had all gone home, the garage was quiet, and the sky was turning that unique shade of orange that only comes at the end of summer. A small voice drew him from his thoughts. "Mr. Luke?" He turned. It was Elijah, 9 years old, big brown eyes, swallowed up in an oversized hoodie. He walked over slowly, nervously twisting the end of his sleeve. Luke smiled at him. "What's up, buddy?" Elijah fidgeted in front of him. "Can I ask something weird?" Luke nodded. "Sure, go ahead." The boy looked down at his shoes. If I don't have a dad, and if you're not too busy, could you maybe be mine?" The question hit Luke harder than any wrench ever had. He stared, stunned, mouth slightly open. He glanced at Madeline, who had just stepped outside with a tray of leftover cookies. She froze, her eyes meeting his, her breath catching in the moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Luke set his tea aside and reached out, resting a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," he said gently. "How about we start with that?" Elijah grinned, eyes shining, and hugged Luke tightly around the waist. Madeline stood in the golden evening light, her hand gripping the tray. She had watched Luke stand tall through misunderstanding, rebuild lives with patience and care, never asking for anything in return. And now, seeing a little boy cling to him like he was the safest place in the world, she knew she had chosen right, not for a name or a suit, but for a man who said yes when a child with nothing asked him to stay. Later that night, as they cleaned up the garage together, Madeline pulled a folded piece of paper from her back pocket. "What's that?" Luke asked. "Our next grant application," she replied with a smile. "I'm thinking we expand, maybe build a small classroom out back." Luke chuckled. "And who's going to teach you?" She grinned. "And you?" She stepped closer and touched his hand. "I'll be right here. Always." They stood quietly, listening to cicadas, the creak of the sign above, and the hum of life finally being lived. Between the scent of oil and the glow of string lights, love had found its home. It was messy, imperfect, real, and exactly what they both needed. The next morning, sunlight crept over the garage's gravel driveway, casting gold across a place once forgotten at the edge of town. Now, Hope Garage was alive long before the workday began. Luke stood in the open bay, a coffee mug in one hand and his other arm holding a sleepy toddler with wild brown curls and a stuffed horse clutched tight. She yawned against his shoulder, tiny fingers gripping his flannel shirt. Inside, Madeline hummed as she packed lunches, one for her, one for Luke, and one for the community center where she volunteered, running workshops for young mothers. She glanced at the door and smiled at the sight of father and daughter, wrapped in the peaceful stillness of early morning. It had been a year since the barn, the chains, and the lies. A year since Luke was accused of crime he didn't commit, and Madeline shattered the silence in front of the whole world. A year since they left everything behind and built something better with their own hands. The garage still fixed cars, but it had become a refuge, a second chance, a home. Kids once labeled as troublemakers now swept floors, learned engines, and shared stories. Veterans brought in old bikes and stayed for coffee. Single parents dropped off battered minivans, and left with more than repairs, they left with hope. The garage wasn't shiny, but it was real. Madeline joined Luke in the doorway, slipping her arm around his waist. "She's getting heavy," he said, shifting their daughter. "She's getting strong," Madeline replied. They looked out at the yard. Under the old oak tree, a wooden sign stood proudly. Once rough and carved by hand, it was now freshly painted and protected with varnish. The letters bold. The right man was never missing, just misunderstood. Beneath it, a flower pot painted blue by a boy named Carlos held sunflowers that turned toward the light, reaching for the sun just as they had. Luke looked down at the small face nestled into his neck, her breath warm and even. "I never imagined life would look like this," he said softly. Madeline rested her head on his shoulder. "That's because you were chasing something else." "I was running," he corrected. "Until you stopped me." She kissed his cheek. "No, you stopped when someone finally believed you were worth staying for." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "You always knew." She nodded. "Even before I knew your name." The wind rustled through the trees. A truck pulled into the lot, one of their volunteers waving from the window. Another day was about to begin. Wrenches, sweat, coffee, conversation, maybe a few scraped knuckles, and plenty of laughter. For now, they stood together. No spotlight, no headlines, no defenses. Just a man who had once been broken, a woman who saw past it, and a child with a smile and her mother's fire growing up in a world where doubt was replaced by truth and love. This was home, not because it was grand, but because it was real. And so, in a dusty corner of a small town, a simple mechanic and a billionaire's daughter proved that love doesn't need wealth, and justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, the true heroes are those who mend broken engines and broken hearts with patience, quiet strength, and the courage to stay. Their story reminds us that healing isn't always found in hospitals, and redemption doesn't always come from a judge. Sometimes, it starts with a single act of kindness. Sometimes, the right person was never lost, just waiting for someone to see them. If this story touched you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we share more powerful, uplifting tales that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for reading. And remember, the most extraordinary stories often begin in the most ordinary places.